kind of gardening.
All right, so tonight we kind of get into, I guess most people would consider the Beatitudes part of the meat of the Sermon on the Mount, but now we're going to get into the practical part that I think so many people like or maybe don't, in as much as Jesus says a lot of things here that are confronting when it comes to how we live our lives. So last week, what we went through formed something of the statement of the theme, and a couple weeks before that, the introduction. Now we're going to get into part one. From here, what we start with tonight at chapter 5, verse 21 until the end of the chapter. We're not going to get that far tonight. We'll see if we even get through what I prepared. We're going to have him clarify our understandings of the law and the understandings the people of his day had of God's law. So Matthew 5:21 and following. And then in chapter 6, it's not going to be so much the 10 Commandment type issues, but he will go into other issues of how you live your life and express your faith, as he tries to show the people that the example that had been set for them and the teaching that had been given to them by the Pharisees was not necessarily a very good example to follow. So chapter 5, beginning at verse 21, we'll probably get through the 5th and 6th commandments. You shall not murder and you shall not commit adultery. So here we start with Matthew chapter 5, 21 to 24, and these screens will cover the section I hope to cover. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin, but anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. You've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. All right. So how would you complete this sentence? God is more concerned with the condition of our hearts than the correctness of our actions, or God is more concerned with the correctness of our actions than the condition of our hearts? I see one hand voting for number 1. I see a hand. I'm not sure what to make of that, Dar.
Oh, number 1.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I thought you said, let's see a show of hands.
oh, yeah. No, I saw one hand with.
Oh, okay.
not that I was asking for a show of hands. Okay.
I'm sorry. Misunderstood you.
You also agree, number 1?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is he unconcerned about our actions?
Not at all.
Not at all. So, but why put the heart first?
It's the motivator usually for our actions.
Yeah.
People can't see our heart, but they can see our actions.
If your actions are right, but your heart is wrong, are you right?
No.
Nope.
If you get the actions wrong, but your heart is right, is that better?
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's not that God's unconcerned about the actions, but if he's got the heart, he's kind of, then there's forgiveness, right? Then there is the opportunity for repentance and faith. But where the heart is hard or rebellious or just wrong, then even if the actions on the outside seem to be the correct actions, that's not what he's looking for, which is why he's not satisfied just to force people to do the right thing from the outside. He isn't a God who comes in and through a raw act of power makes people do what he wants. He allows and tolerates a fair amount of activity and behavior in the wrong way. But what he really wants is to get those hearts, because he knows that when the heart comes, then the rest of it comes. And as we get into this part of the Sermon on the Mount, this is going to become something that lies behind what Jesus is doing with his corrections. The people had a kind of surface understanding of the commandments. The Pharisees had kind of a surface understanding of the commandments. All the extra applications that they made that come up later in the Gospels, where they have all the extra commandments for how you keep the Sabbath day, extra commandments for how you eat your food properly. Those extra commandments were supposed to make it possible to actually keep the commandments and do what God desired and wanted. The problem with them is that you could do all those things externally, but it gave no indication where your heart was. And they so fixated on doing things right that they really lost their hearts. So as he clarifies things, he's going to be showing you and me that the law is beyond keeping in its in a true understanding of it. But part of that is because he really wants to get at the heart. And we'll see that as we look at this part of Matthew chapter 5 tonight. So first of all, fifth commandment, you shall not murder. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. The people long ago, original language Greek, the ancients, sort of how it reads. Just how long ago does long ago go? How far back does long ago for this commandment go? Anybody know where? I mean, so you find the commandment if you're going to be looking in the Bible itself in Exodus chapter 20. Verse 13, that's where the 10 commandments are recorded the first time. And then you've got them repeated in the book of Deuteronomy. But if you think of your Bible history before the Exodus, where does murder come up for the first time as an issue?
Genesis, Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, right? After the fall into sin itself, which is almost more of a ceremonial law, don't eat from the fruit of that tree. The very first major sin that gets recorded is the sin of murder, right, with Cain and Abel, and God warning Cain about how he has to conquer his hatred towards his brother and not let sin be his master. But it goes all the way back to the first chapters of the Bible, right after the creation account. What constitutes murder, biblically speaking? I think that the translators are correct not to merely make it do not kill, but do not murder. And based on the original language, the words there would suggest the same distinction between merely do not kill and do not murder. What constitutes murder, biblically speaking? What kind of killing does it have to be murder?
Bearing false witness against our neighbor.
That's not murder.
Well,
I'm not looking for examples of murder here, Mark, but what kind of killing does it have to be in order to be well, okay, so maybe take this together with the next question. Let's legitimate biblical exceptions to God's command that we not end human life.
Legitimate exceptions would be like self-defense and
Right.
if you're a soldier.
What was the second one there?
Being in the
wartime.
military.
All right. If you're a soldier, right? Self-defense. So what distinguishes that from what actually does constitute murder?
I think murder is selfish.
All right. All right. So if you are taking a life as a soldier, you're definitely taking a life. It might be a very violent thing. I remember when I saw the movie about D-Day that Spielberg made with Tom Hanks in it a few years ago. What was that called?
Was that Saving Private Ryan?
Saving Private Ryan, right? Towards the end of the movie, there is a scene. Well, I mean, first of all, the carnage at the beginning is just, it's hard to watch almost. And then towards the end of the scene, there is a fairly, at the end of the movie, there's this fairly drawn out scene between a German soldier and an American soldier. It's a knife fight. I think they have shot at each other and are out of ammo. It's a knife fight, but just the slow way in which the German soldier finally inserts the knife into the chest of the American. But when you're at war, we don't think of it as murder as such, even though it might be very violent. So
I think it,
when
well,
you are, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when talking about what constitutes murder, I would think it would be your thought and your intent.
Okay.
If you're killing someone just for the sake of killing someone or because they anger you, then it's murder. I mean, so because your intention is evil, I think that's the way I would put that.
So properly speaking, with war, we would think of it as a self-defense issue. Not that the soldier is defending himself personally, but any just war needs to be a defensive war for your country rather than offensive war in which you are simply trying to take someone else's territory away from them. When you are personally defending your home or somebody has got you under attack, that's a different thing. You haven't maliciously gone after that other person, but since they're trying to take your life, you are simply trying to preserve your own. What about something like executions? A lot of people today will say to Christians, well, you're pro-life, or at least you say you're pro-life, but you are okay with executing people and having the death penalty, capital punishment. That doesn't seem consistent. You may even know the Catholic Church as a whole condemns capital punishment and says that it's not right.
No.
Well, why isn't capital punishment murder?
Because it's law. Love the land.
Okay.
Because doesn't Paul tell us that that's what the government has the sword to keep order?
All right. So in the New Testament, you've got Romans 13. He does not bear the sword for nothing. He's God's servant and agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So God has given the government the power to use deadly force for its purposes, and that with that comes the death penalty. Way back in Genesis again, Genesis 9:6, after the flood, whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God is God made man. So especially when someone is taking other people's lives into their own hands with malice, the government has the right to require a life of that person. And it's a different thing. It does not come under this. But what you recognize is a big part of the distinction again is what is the state of the heart if we're going to judge something as murder or not. But where Jesus is going to go with this now is he's going to, while on the one hand, we recognize that there are exceptional cases of killing that don't get categorized as murder. There are other things that seem to fall short of killing that Jesus now would throw into the same category. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. So often, as we've pointed out in Bible classes, in the original Bible languages, especially the Greek, they have a number of different terms with meaningful distinctions for a concept that might seem pretty much the same to us. I mean, we have synonyms for the word angry. You can be mad, you can be angry, you can be furious. But I don't know that in our heads we think that those words mean something much different from each other. The word you have for angry here is a word that it's not a sudden burst of passion kind of anger. It is a word that one commentator describes. It's the settled habit of the mind which is focused on revenge. So you've got something different than just a sudden passionate reaction. I don't know how much of a distinction we have to make here, whether the other kind is that much better, frankly, but that is what Jesus is describing here. When he talks about anger with his brother, well, it would seem to be more than just your neighbor, but someone that you kind of know, someone who's closer. Maybe not literally in every case your family, your physical family brother, but someone that you know well. This might be one of those cases. I don't know what the newer version of the NIV has, or some of the modern translations where it might even say his brother or sister. That wouldn't necessarily be illegitimate in this case, but somebody who's a little closer to you. I asked the question, is it easier or harder to control your anger toward those who are close to you?
Harder.
Okay. Why do you think so, Kathy?
Because you know that old phrase, familiarity breeds contempt?
Yep. Okay.
We don't have the respect for them many times that we would for someone we don't know as well.
Okay. If someone at the store that you never met before, maybe a cashier, said something insulting to you, you might not like it and you might tell the manager, right?
Right.
But if Mark said something, the same thing may be insulting to you, I'm going to guess it might be pretty cold around the house for quite some time. And frankly, you would get home from shopping and blow off what the cashier said to you. But you might hold a grudge a little bit on the other hand, right? And very often the people we're close to are because we care about them, we care about what they think.
Right.
And so often it is easier to become angry with them and harder to get past it. And so here. So Jesus seems to be saying that anger and murder can be seen as more or less tantamount to each other. Is anger really tantamount to murder?
Always.
Or what about a righteous anger?
What God had after watching the Israelites worship the false idols.
Yeah.
Okay.
Overturning the.
We had a righteous anger.
Okay.
But if going back to what you said about the anger part of it, if it's not just a sudden burst of anger like Jesus had in the temple when he turned the tables over, but more of a pondering like Joseph's brothers who actually kind of premeditated that whole situation.
Right. Yeah. For a long time, they didn't like their little brother. And there was a lot of premeditated malicious behavior going on as a result of it. Can we have righteous anger?
Sure.
Yes.
Is it something we should indulge?
No.
All right.
Low anger.
Yep. Be slow to anger.
Yeah. Yeah. And recognize, like in James, it says, everybody should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because man's anger does not bring about the righteous life God desires, right? It's possible that we can have a righteous anger, and it's appropriate. Like when parents become angry at their children for doing bad things, that's probably more of the spontaneous burst of passion, and it may be a part of what is necessary to communicate to the little kids that what they've done is bad. It may be necessary to be a part of the discipline. It doesn't necessarily chase out love. It doesn't mean they want bad things for their children, but that they are genuinely upset and expressing that could be righteous anger. If you see someone committing a crime, that may arouse in you a certain righteous anger. Now, you have to be careful with what you do with that. But if you actually were an eyewitness of it and it led you to intervene in a particular case, that may be actually a good thing. We have to be a little careful not to become vigilantes, but if you could intervene in such a way as to spare somebody, that may all be appropriate, right? So anger can be okay. Again, it has a lot to do with the condition of the heart. Is this something that is working against and chasing out love altogether? And then the 1 John 3:15 passage I have there, I think you're probably familiar, whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. So they're on that same spectrum. Hate we usually see as something stronger than just anger. But there is a spectrum with all of these things. And anger often leads to hate, and then hate to murder, that Jesus wants to warn about. The rabbis came up with all kinds of false distinctions in his day, and the people wanted to defend themselves as thinking that they were not guilty of this commandment. But Jesus would say, no, pretty sure you've gotten angry before, and yeah, you've sinned in this as well. And then he goes on to give some examples of what anger produces. He's kind of putting into this whole same spectrum as well. The difference between raka and fool. Raka is an Aramaic term of contempt or an insult. It's basically empty. It'd be a little bit like calling a person an airhead. You've got all these funny things that we might say that indicate a person maybe is a little less intelligence, like not playing with a full deck, or elevator doesn't quite reach the top floor, or there's a little too much yardage between the goalposts, or other ways that we can describe a person as being kind of empty up in the head. That's more or less the sense of it. Fool comes from the root of the same word which we have in English as moron. So mora in the Greek, it's basically a moron. Fool has a little bit of the idea of a little bit more maybe of a moral tinge to it, but in both cases, Jesus seems to be saying don't use those kinds of things. And it would appear that when he brings up, it's not he's saying that, okay, some people say it's okay to use one and some not the other. The rabbis, again, would always try to draw these fake distinctions or these rankings of sins. And to some degree, Jesus himself seems to be kind of mocking that tendency for them to do that. Basically, whether it's to the Sanhedrin or Gehenna, the fires of hell, he's saying, stay away from that kind of insulting language at people that you've gotten angry at, and recognize that it's a big deal. In one case, it may land you in trouble with the local ruling body. In either case, these are damnable sins. Stay away from them.
I'm going to give up my driver's license.
Well, we need to keep our self-control, don't we?
Yep.
Yes, yeah. React to this advice. People need to vent their anger so that it doesn't build up and explode.
Oh.
Modern psychology would say, don't just shove it in. Don't just keep it in. Otherwise, you're just a ticking time bomb.
There's a difference, though, between that and self-control.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can take a breath, count to 10, and then say something a little bit more benign instead of.
Somebody maybe come up with a better word than vent.
Explode.
No, a better word.
Okay.
I see what you're saying. I'm not looking for a more visual or
A better word for the word vent.
fancy word. I'm just looking for, if you're going to talk about what to do with your anger so you don't explode, maybe a better way of expressing it.
Would be control.
Okay. Should it get out?
Express.
Express. I think express their anger, right? You can tell someone you're mad at them without raging. You don't have to pick the choice words. You don't have to get all red in the face. Okay, you don't want it to build up, and you don't just want to shove it down, and people need to know where they stand. There is a time to confront the wrong thing. Again, parents do it with kids, but I think we expect that parents don't belittle their children, right? They may have to speak strongly to them, but you hope that the parents don't rob the children of all self-esteem by belittling them in the process. And you've maybe seen some of that before, hopefully not done too much of it yourself. So it has to get out, but we should be careful how we let it out. Apply Jesus' words to the way people interact on social media today. Should we be bound by the things he says here when communicating online? And does it make a difference if the position that we're taking is the moral or correct one, or the position of those speaking against us is immoral or false when we're, do you know what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, I think so. When there's something inflammatory said or something really derogatory, or somebody makes fun of someone else online, how should we react to it?
I've noticed that a number of websites that present news or opinions about the news have taken down their comment sections altogether.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them still have them. They try to police them to a degree, but what gets into the comments section, if you just watch a YouTube video, there are too, a lot of people just have decided to turn off the comments section. But when it's not, I mean, it gets graphic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we be bound by the things Jesus says here when we're communicating online in those kinds of settings?
Of course.
Yeah.
How about when you're making Facebook posts?
Yep, same thing.
Do you see Christian friends sometimes forwarding or reposting stuff on Facebook that makes you think,
Yeah.
they don't talk that way themselves?
And I've seen them comment in an unchristian manner too.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I've heard people say, well, I don't talk this way, but I felt strongly about it. And I'd say, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it. If it's not the kind of language you could feel comfortable using around church,
Yeah, shouldn't do it.
don't do it. Just because some politician made you really mad, don't do it. And again, careful how you choose your words about your politicians, right? The Bible rule here, and not just this commandment, but also the previous commandment, the fourth commandment, is respect those in authority.
Exactly.
You don't have to agree with them, but you don't have to disagree in an insulting and disrespectful manner, right? And I think that it's across our nation, it has just led to an incivility. You see people dropping the F-bombs.
That's crazy.
Or just cussing in a way that in the past, it just would not have happened.
Yeah.
And we should not be feeding it. We should be trying to set the example in the other direction. So
I get caught.
Go ahead.
I get caught liking something and then sharing it before I hear the, and then after a while I go back and finish listening to it. So no.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's another thing. People do it based on the headline.
Yep.
And they don't really get into what it says behind the headline, and sometimes wonder, well, if you read the whole article, maybe you wouldn't be so quick to like and share.
And a lot of times it's unfortunately false.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes it even worse somehow.
All right. So you may be convinced the person's an idiot for having said what they said, but that doesn't mean you have to express it online for all the world to see.
Keep on scrolling.
Keep on scrolling. Jesus would have us be a little more careful about the way we speak. All right, Matthew 5:23. Therefore, and notice right below the passage there, I say it's Jesus' own application or conclusion. So Jesus himself now is saying, based on what I've said about murder, based on what I've said about strong language, what you call your brother, based on what I've said about anger, this is not the only application you can make, but this is one he strongly wanted his people of his time to make. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. So he says, you remember your brother has something against you in his picture. Who's angry and who's guilty?
Your brother's angry.
And who's guilty?
You.
Would seem that you did something to them, and what you did made them angry. So he takes what he's talked about, but now he's kind of putting a twist on it, because now you are on the other side of that anger. It's possible that it's a mutual feeling. That happens very often, right? Once we do something, somebody gets mad at us, and all of a sudden, because they retaliated, we start to justify our bad behavior. But he says, leave your gift. Leave your gift at the altar if you remember when you're there at the temple that someone is angry at you about something you did. What did Jews bring to the altars?
Their sacrifice
And what would their sacrifices be?
for forgiveness.
What would the sacrifice be?
Animals.
Animals.
Oh, blood sacrifices.
Yeah, so how does this make Jesus' instruction here difficult?
He brought himself.
If we go to church today, your sacrifice, if you will, is probably, if at all, what of yours goes on the altar?
Tithing, gifts, or
Yeah,
money.
your money. Right. Well, okay, so
First,
that's not such a big deal, perhaps, to say, okay, before I go and offer my gift. But if you think of ancient times, you're in Jerusalem. Good chance maybe you don't live in Jerusalem. Jesus is not telling the Sermon on the Mount in Jerusalem. He's telling the Sermon on the Mount on a hillside by the Sea of Galilee, right? That's the setting. So he says, okay, so you just made the 100-mile trip on foot with your sheep to Jerusalem. You go into the temple with your sheep, with thousands of other people. You get to the altar, and there you remember, right? He says, you are offering your gift at the altar. You got your sheep all the way from Galilee to Jerusalem, and you're in the temple. And there you remember your brother has something against you. What does he tell you to do?
go and be reconciled,
And then
and then come and offer your offering.
bring your gifts. I mean, in other words, he's saying you're willing to go to a great inconvenience to get this taken care of. What are you going to do with the animal? Who's going to watch it for you? Are you going to lead it around town? How far do you have to go to find your brother?
Yeah.
Does he live in Jerusalem? Is he in Jerusalem at the same time? It's a hassle, right? It's kind of a problem. But he says, leave your gift at the altar and be reconciled. To be reconciled here, it's an unusual term in the Greek. It's related to the general word we have in the New Testament for something like reconcile, like in 2 Corinthians 5:19, we implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. But here it's a word that would speak of it's not like there's just one side that's kind of in the wrong, but it's two sides here. So that may suggest that while your brother has something against you, you've also been angry and have had things against him. So it's a bad relationship both ways, and somebody needs to take the first step to try to put it together. But so everything that we've described here, what does it say about God's priorities for us? Does he want our gifts as tokens of, does he want our gifts as tokens of our love, or does he want us to love his other children the most?
He wants us to love his other children the most.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in a fight with one of your kids and I came over to your house with a cake or something, yeah, you'd probably wish that I would get that other relationship. And that's the thing you'd really want done, right? And for God also, that we come to worship him, that's great. He wants us to worship him. That we bring him our gifts as tokens of our hearts and our affection. That's good. He's actually commanded that. But in terms of where this fits in his priorities, that we would get together with our brother or sister, the other members of the family, that's what he really wants. If my kids came home and two of my kids were fighting with each other, I don't care what they brought. I want my kids to get along.
Exactly.
Right? That's the thing. How do unreconciled relationships affect worship? You ever been in a church where two of the members were feuding?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Mhm.
I see heads wagging yes. If you haven't,
Yeah,
that's a
it
good
does.
thing.
It affects your worship.
Maybe you've been unaware. How does that affect worship?
It causes a division,
Okay.
divides us from God.
Yeah. I mean, so when people go to worship, you suppose, do they have their minds and hearts on what they're supposed to be there for if the other person's also present?
Preoccupied.
Not
Yeah.
always, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
So not only is it that God wants that reconciled relationship more than he wants our tokens of affection, but he also recognizes we're not probably going to get much done here. In a family again, where maybe everybody's home at Thanksgiving. Well, so in the area that we live in now, the people, our current president has had people feel, that people just love him or they just hate him. And even in the same family, they talk about how you've got to, some people think they've got to excommunicate their family members because they take the opposite side, or they can't get together and sit at the table at Thanksgiving. You can have strong political opinions, but you recognize it is a problem because you have people at loggerheads with each other. The rest of what you're supposed to be doing is family. It doesn't work. It's just as a problem. And in the church in particular, when you've got people who are in unreconciled relationships, who are harboring grudges, they probably aren't actually getting any worship done anyway, because they're thinking about how angry they are at the other person. So the next question comes because sometimes people have taken this passage and applied it to our communion practice, in particular our close communion practice. Is it valid to apply these words to our communion practice, and if so, how? We do not come to the altar with sheep and goats. We do put our money in the offering plate. That gets up on the altar. We come to the altar usually to receive instead of give. Okay, so that's the difference.
We should come with repentant hearts too.
Yeah. How would it be standing next to someone you're really ticked off at?
Exactly.
While the pastor puts the body and blood of the Lord into your hand.
Yeah.
That's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so there too, I've known in my congregations from time to time where people get that, and they may even get as far as church, but they will kind of self-excommunicate. They will keep themselves away from the communion table until something has been done about that uncomfortable situation. They recognize it's a problem for their communing together. And recognize that in a bigger way in Christianity, that the issue of close communion also kind of comes from this. To a degree where the churches have not been able to settle their disagreements over Christian doctrine and teaching, it's not that we necessarily believe the other side is outside of the Christian church altogether, right? But it's not that we don't believe Baptists are still Christians or that Presbyterians are still Christians, but we haven't been able to fully reconcile the differences. And that's a problem in the worship. And so it would be better to fix that first instead of to come before God's altar together. And I think there is some valid application here of the words. Matthew 5:25, settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. So this becomes from Jesus a little parable or illustration of the point that he's been making, you can't press every detail of this, but he's just as he had said, first be reconciled. He's gone from don't be angry, don't start insulting, recognize that those things also can be sins. Then he has said, don't just live in that unreconciled relationship. And now he's trying to impress upon us with this illustration or little parable, the importance of taking care of it quickly. So he's illustrating his previous point, what seems to be the specific legal issue between you and your adversary in the picture, in the little parable he's telling us here.
He doesn't say specifically.
He hints at it pretty strong in verse 26.
Oh, money. Probably an unpaid debt.
So it would appear to be some kind of an unpaid debt. You know, later in his ministry where the Apostle Peter asks him, how much do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times. And Jesus says 70 times 7. And then he tells a parable of the unforgiving servant, right? Where the servant was forgiven the huge debt by his master, and then he went and throttled his fellow servant who owed him just a small debt by comparison. So it's somewhat similar to that whole setting and situation. So kind of the picture of owing a debt. And so the person's taking you to court over it. And he's saying, before you get before the judge, might be a good idea to see if you can take care of it. When it says in the NIV here, settle matters, I don't know if any of you have another translation of the Bible in front of you, but literally it has more to do with be of a good mind towards the person, or well-minded. It's almost like be friendly, be on good terms, but in your mind, and then in the way that you're interacting with the other person, be on good terms with them might be a way of saying it. So you kind of patch things up before it gets all the way to court. Otherwise, you might face what he talks about here in the end. So the last penny, just a little bit of Bible trivia, perhaps. Obviously, they didn't have the same money system that we do. If they were using their Jewish money, then it was shekels. And if they were using Greek money, it was drachma. And if they were using Roman money, which likely was most of the time, then it would have been denarius. But in the Roman system, the word actually that appears in Matthew is a word that would be 1/64th of a denarius. A denarius was your typical day's wage, or it was 1/4 of an assarion, which was one of their smaller amounts. It would have been, you remember the widow who put in her mites? It would have been 2 of 1 of her mites, the amount. So he's talking about a very small amount is the point. And that's probably more than you need to know about ancient currency. But in general, what does Jesus seem to be urging here? So what seems to be the main point behind the little illustration?
Forgiveness.
Okay, forgiveness. And what about the timing of that forgiveness?
Do it right away.
Yeah, don't wait around. Get after this. Don't let those unreconciled relationships just fester and go a long time. When you know it's there, you know it's uncomfortable for everybody. It feels awkward, but address it right away. Go talk to the person. Be the first person. Don't wait for them to come to you, even if you feel like it's their fault mostly. Eat a little humble pie and get after it right away. Don't let it go. And just a final note, note how God took the initiative in reconciling us to him, right? Obviously, when we talk about guilty party and offended party between us and him, we're the guilty party, he's the offended party. But even though we were the guilty party, he didn't wait for us to come to him. He went and he sought us, and he took care of the issue. And so he is asking us to do no more than what he has done in his relationship with us. So questions, comments about that stretch? Kind of wraps up one section here tonight. got about 10 minutes. Maybe we can make a run for this. Matthew 5:27. We can at least maybe get through half of this part at least. So that's the 5th commandment. Now we're going to get into the 6th commandment. You've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. A note that I'll make for you, because it's going to come up a little bit later, we may not get to where it's most important yet tonight. It's going to come down when we talk about divorce. But in the Greek, commit adultery is a transitive verb. Anybody from your high school English class remember, what specifically does it mean if something is a transitive or an intransitive verb? Anybody remember? No, shaking heads. A transitive verb takes a direct object. An intransitive verb doesn't take an object. Let's see, what would be an example of? Well, the linking verb isn't transitive. To be is. Under most circumstances, swimming. Now, it can become a transitive verb. If you're swimming, you don't swim something unless you're talking about like swimming a race, right? It's just an activity, but it's not an activity you do to something else. But when they talk about adultery in the Greek, it's got the idea of to someone else, and that's not hard for us to understand. But we don't really. We may say that you commit adultery against somebody or with somebody, but we don't just adultery a person, right? We don't just say you adultery a person. In the Greek, they do, and when we get down to divorce later, that's going to be important to remember. We'll bring it back up at that point in time. Lust is a neutral word in the Greek. It's just where he says anybody who looks at a woman lustfully. Basically, he just says with desire, and like our English word desire, it's not wrong to desire things, right? We have lots of desires, but the context is going to determine whether this is good or bad. And of course here, the idea is that it's a bad desire. It's what we would more specifically call lust. Jesus particularly singles out men for lustful looking. Why is this somewhat natural? And are his words limited to males?
His words aren't limited to men,
Right.
but men are more visual typically than women.
Yeah, that's nothing new, that men were
Right.
the ones who God created to be attracted visually to the other sex. And, women, it's not to say that women don't recognize a good-looking guy and somebody who's attractive, but they aren't visual in quite the same way. And while they're capable of lusting, certainly we've all probably seen examples of it, it's more of a male weakness, which likely has to do with why he speaks in terms of men. He may be talking to men especially because he has disciples, 12, who are all male around him especially. But we've seen the Sermon on the Mount had a wider audience as well. But he addresses it to the men. How does dressing modestly fit into Jesus' concern here? Where does the responsibility for avoiding lust fall?
Each individual.
Okay. There's been a movement today sometimes to try to say to women that they shouldn't be body shamed. There's a proper way, I think, to understand that and even agree with it. But do women have any responsibility in terms of how they cover up in the presence of males?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there's if
I
you're
think
going to
so.
flaunt it, there's like a modest way and there's a not very modest way to do it.
A lot of that's going to be culturally determined, right? If you see pictures of women from Victorian times,
Mm-hmm.
at that time, long dresses were the rule because to see an ankle was scandalous.
Oh
At
yeah.
the same time, to see some bosom, they may have a fairly low cut top of their dress or shirt that they're wearing, but they got to have the ankles covered. And so it can be somewhat cultural as to what is considered appropriate or not. And, you know, how a woman dresses at the beach versus how she dresses in the grocery store, we would expect to be somewhat different too. But there's something there. But regarding Jesus' words, still ultimately, where does the responsibility regarding lust fall?
With the individual.
With the individual male who would be tempted to it, right? So while, you know, men have to maybe work sometimes to keep their eyes where they belong, and certainly need not to go searching around online or in magazines or what have you. And you know, we live in a society that's going to be putting this before us all the time. When I would teach about the sixth commandment to the confirmation class, my previous congregation, I would point out that on the main highway, the main north-south artery between Dallas and the suburbs to the north, US Highway 75 Central Expressway, near what used to be Nortel. I don't know what it is now. It's not Nortel anymore, but a big corporate headquarters was this big sign, big billboard on the freeway advertising Coors Light beer. And kind of draped across the Coors Light beer can was a woman in a white bikini.
Oh, yeah.
What does she have to do with Coors Light? Do you suppose she's the brewmaster? I don't think so. Why is she there? Why is she there?
Because sex sells.
Yeah, because they're playing to the male weakness, aren't they?
Yep.
And that's just the world in which we live. So, you know, a Christian woman will want to help men in love by considering modesty. But at the end of the day, the man is going to have to do the work of trying to keep his eyes where they belong.
And I know if my wife was inappropriate in my own feeling about it in public, I would be
Ashamed.
not necessarily ashamed, but it would cause me to be
Jealous?
jealous.
there you
And
go.
why are you doing this to me? Or, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. It feels
what are
almost like a
you
betrayal.
looking for? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Is it wrong for a man to notice a woman's beauty?
No.
No.
No. In fact, God made the sexes to be attracted to each other. So it's not wrong to feel attracted to her, right? So, you know, I've seen the question even just recently, you know, well, is it okay for,
She's married.
you know, inside of marriage, is it okay for a man to, or for a woman, you know, to have lust? Well, I don't think we even call it lust, but the desire is natural and appropriate, and God wants that to be there. In fact, you know, the sexual relationship going forward through life is a part of what he uses in order to try to help deal with this issue, right? So, no, not at all. Inside of marriage, the modesty issues go away. I mean, you know, to a large degree anyway, but it's the sexual relationship is appropriate and that we're attracted. It's the way, that's by design. That's by design. We just have to work to keep it in check otherwise. Will it be possible to avoid the sin altogether?
No.
Nope, we will always have opportunity for the reasons that I mentioned. And so Jesus isn't trying to teach us some kind of a perfectionism. What he is saying is the standard is much higher than just not having sex with somebody you're not married to. It goes all the way again to issues of your desire, your inner desire. You're back to the heart again, like we said at the beginning.
Yeah, well, the pornography is poison.
Yes, it is. Okay, so he's got an illustration of this one too, to a degree. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to go into hell. You may be familiar with this terminology before. The Greek word for cause to sin is skandalizo. We get our word scandal from it. And the idea behind scandalizo is to be a trap, or there's an old Scottish translation of the Bible, the Braid Scott. And in that translation, it says, if your right eye ensnare ye, right? If it ensnares you. And behind the idea of scandalizo is a trap. When you set up like a box trap where, you got the box and you got a stick and the stick is the trigger, and maybe the stick is attached to a string and some bait of some sort, or like a mouse trap has got the lever that you pull back, and that's the trap stick, and the scandalizo is that part of it. So something that traps you, that ensnares you, causes you to sin is a good interpretive way of translating it there. It's sometimes spoken of as offense, but not like offense like something made me feel bad, like you offended me, but offense in the sense that it causes you to sin. It ensnares or traps you in sin. When he talks about hell here, the Greek there is Gehenna, which is really just a transliteration of Greek of a Hebrew. The Valley of Hinnom is something that sometimes comes up. It was a valley on the one side of Jerusalem. It was kind of the garbage dump. It was on fire and it burned constantly, and it became almost a euphemistic or just illustrative way that the Jews had of referring to hell. And so hell is a good translation here again, but more literally, Jesus talks about being thrown into Gehenna, which was, he didn't mean that you get thrown into the garbage dump, but everybody understood when he talked about Gehenna, it was talking about the place of eternal suffering. Maybe a good place to just mention that when it comes to talk about hell in the Bible, it rarely comes up in the Old Testament. The prophet Isaiah has a little bit about hell in his last chapter. The apostles of Jesus, Paul, John, Peter, when they write, they almost never mention hell. Almost all the mention of hell that we have in the Bible comes in the Gospels from Jesus' own lips. Sometimes people have the idea that Jesus is, the loving God, apart from the Old Testament God who's all about death and damnation, but nobody talks about hell more than Jesus does. In fact, almost everything that really is descriptive of it that we know about it comes directly from his mouth in the Gospels. And that's not to say that that was the majority of his ministry, but recognize that, he does certainly not deny hell that some people would today. How do we take these words? If your eye causes you to sin, and he just talked about lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better to do that than go to hell for your lust. So do we take those words symbolically? Do we take them literally? Is this hyperbole?
Symbolic.
Does he really expect you to gouge your eyes out?
No.
If you could guarantee you would stay out of hell and that you would go to heaven by gouging your eyes out, would that be a good deal?
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Can you pay for heaven with your eyes?
No.
No. But if you could, it would be the greatest deal ever, right? If you could guarantee you would go to heaven by gouging your eyes out, it would be the best deal ever.
When you got there, you'd have a brand new body.
That is correct. What's the issue here? Do your eyes cause you to sin?
No, your heart
No.
causes you to sin.
All right. So if your eyes cause you to sin, you could maybe see taking this more or less literally. The problem is your eyes aren't actually what cause you to sin. That comes from the heart. You've got the reference there from Matthew chapter 15. You maybe memorized it before. From within, out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, blasphemy. Right? That's where Jesus says all the sins proceed. So I don't know that we have to make it symbolical. The issue is that the eye doesn't cause you to sin. The hand doesn't cause you to sin. These things are the tools of the heart. And of course, you can't rip your heart out.
Right.
Is there ever a time that we actually do something quite similar to what Jesus describes in those verses? Is there ever a time we would cut somebody's hand off, literally?
Saudi.
Say it again.
In Saudi.
Saudi Arabia
Mm-hmm.
for stealing.
What?
That's a
Okay. Okay.
punishment, right? For
Okay.
stealing.
So what about you or me? What if you got gangrene?
Oh.
Would you
Yeah.
cut the hand off to save the body?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do it a lot less because of antibiotics today, but it was not uncommon in the past, right?
Right.
If you got cancer, would you remove a kidney?
Sure.
So you would cut a part of the body out in order to save the rest of the body.
Sure.
Yeah. So if you
But
could,
that's just the, yeah. That's just the physical body.
right. Yeah. If you had breast cancer, right, would you have a mastectomy? Possibly. So with the physical body, we would save the physical body by cutting a part of the body away. If you could save your spirit by cutting a part of the body away, it would not be a bad deal. Again, the issue is that it doesn't actually work. So what is the point finally Jesus wants to make about sin with his statements about gouging out eyes or cutting off hands?
Going back to sin begins in the heart, and that's
Begins in the heart. And how seriously should we take it?
Very serious.
very serious.
Right? Even if it seems to be just looking, right?
Yeah.
Just looking. I'm not going to do anything with her. I'm just looking. Or even if it's, it's just words, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, and it won't hurt anybody else either. It's just talk. It's just a little fit of anger. No, Jesus says, sin is sin. Don't let it land you in. You take it seriously and you get right after it. So after both of these descriptions of sin, he ends them with illustrations that say, you got to take this stuff seriously and get right after it, right? Don't wait to be reconciled. You fix those relationships. And don't mess around with things like lust or adultery even. You deal with that, and you don't let it don't let it invade your mind and sit in there.
Become your favorite sin.
Your pet sin.
So the last thing is that it's in this regard that you maybe have heard this quote from Luther, and he's actually quoting old church fathers when he says, I cannot keep a bird from flying over my head. So the fact may be that I'm going to let a word slip or get mad. The fact may be that there's going to be some woman who maybe isn't dressed so modestly, but it's not her fault that I take a second look, right? I cannot keep a bird from flying over my head, but I can certainly keep it from nesting in my hair or biting off my nose. So we have to take sin seriously and not let it get a root in our lives. We understand as Lutherans that there's grace and forgiveness, that we're saved by grace, by faith through grace alone. That doesn't mean we stop taking sin seriously. Okay, we're not going to go any further, a little past time now. We'll pick up divorce next time, and then we'll get into the other commandments. The second commandment he's going to take up, and the idea of revenge as we finish out the chapter. Questions or comments on anything we looked at tonight? All right, well, stay dry. Enjoy the cool weather that we're getting here with this little break from summer. And God willing, we'll see you on Sunday. Let's close again with the blessing. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.